I froze in the doorway. For one impossible second, I thought I had walked into the wrong house. The hallway looked familiar. The old oak shelf still held the ceramic bowl where I tossed my keys every evening. The framed photograph of a mountain trail I had hiked years ago still hung slightly crooked because I had never bothered to straighten it. Everything was exactly where I had left it that morning, except for one thing. Someone was asleep in my bed. The afternoon sunlight drifted through the curtains, painting quiet patterns across the room. A woman lay curled beneath a knitted blanket, her shoes neatly placed beside the bed as though she intended to leave without disturbing anyone. I recognized her before she even opened her eyes. Hazel. My ex-wife's younger sister. I hadn't seen her in nearly 3 years. Just as I took a careful step backward, hoping to quietly leave and figure out what on earth had happened, she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly. For a brief moment she looked confused, almost frightened, before recognition softened her expression. Oliver? I nodded carefully. She pushed herself upright, brushing loose strands of chestnut hair behind her ears. She looked exhausted rather than embarrassed. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Neither of us spoke for several long seconds. Then she asked the question that would quietly change both our lives. Can I stay here? There was no drama in her voice. No expectation. No manipulation. Only the kind of tired hope that belonged to someone who had spent far too many days pretending everything was fine. I looked at the small overnight bag resting against the wardrobe. Then I looked back at her. I think, I said gently, before we answer that, you should probably tell me how you got into my house. To my surprise, she laughed. It wasn't a joyful laugh. It was the laugh of someone realizing how unbelievable the situation sounded. I still had the emergency key. I blinked. The one your family used to keep? She nodded. You forgot to ask for it back after. She stopped before saying the word. The divorce. Neither of us seemed eager to invite that memory into the room. I rubbed my forehead. I honestly forgot that key even existed. I almost turned around, she admitted. I stood outside for 20 minutes. What changed your mind? I remembered you. That answer lingered in the room longer than either of us expected. She wasn't saying she remembered our friendship. She wasn't saying she remembered happier holidays. She meant something simpler. She remembered the kind of person she believed I still was. I sighed. Have you eaten today? She looked away. I had tea. So that's a no. I wasn't very hungry. I smiled faintly. I'll make dinner. You don't have to. I know. She looked close to crying. She stopped again. I didn't know where else to go. Those words carried a weight that made further questions feel unnecessary. Not yet. I simply nodded. You're safe here tonight. She closed her eyes. The relief on her face was so quiet that it almost hurt to witness. Some people celebrate being rescued. Others simply breathe again. An hour later we sat opposite each other at the tiny kitchen table. Nothing fancy. Vegetable soup. Fresh bread. Cheese. Tea. The same simple meal I often cooked after long days at the community workshop where I repaired donated furniture for families starting over. Hazel ate slowly, almost apologetically. You still cook too much. You still pretend you're full after 3 bites. She smiled. I suppose some things don't change. No. They don't? Silence settled comfortably between us. Not awkward. Just careful. Eventually she placed her spoon down. I should explain. You don't owe me anything tonight. I think I do. I leaned back. I'm listening. She stared into her tea before speaking. When Emma and you divorced, even hearing my former wife's name after so long felt strange. Everyone expected me to choose sides. I never asked you to. I know. Emma probably did. Hazel gave a tiny nod. She wasn't cruel. I didn't say she was. She was hurt. So was I. Another quiet nod. I stopped visiting either of you after a while. I noticed. I thought staying away was the fairest thing. Was it? No. Her answer came immediately. It just made everyone lonelier. The honesty surprised me. She continued. Mum passed away last year. I heard. I'm sorry. Thank you. And Dad moved into assisted living? 6 months ago. I didn't know. He didn't want people worrying. That sounds like him. She smiled sadly. He still thinks he can mow every lawn in the neighborhood. I laughed. That definitely sounds like him. The laughter faded gently. After Dad moved, I stayed in the family house for a while. And now? It was sold. I waited. I thought I'd be fine. But I wasn't. She folded her hands together. I realized I'd spent years looking after everyone else. Her voice remained calm. Mum, Dad, my sister, my job, my neighbors, everyone. And when they all moved on, she looked around my kitchen. I discovered I didn't actually know where home was. That sentence stayed with me. Home wasn't always a building. Sometimes it was simply the place where someone expected nothing from you except honesty. I understood that feeling better than most. After my own divorce, people had assumed I would either become bitter or disappear. Instead, I had quietly rebuilt my life one ordinary day at a time. Morning walks, repairing furniture, volunteering, reading, helping wherever I could. Nothing extraordinary. Just enough small kindnesses to remind myself that difficult endings didn't erase good people. Hazel studied me carefully. You look different. Older? Wiser. I laughed. I definitely have more gray hair. It suits you. I'll pretend that was a compliment. It was. She looked around again. The house feels peaceful. It took a while. I remember how empty it felt. So do I. Neither of us mentioned Emma again. Some stories didn't need revisiting. Not because they weren't important. Because they had already taught their lesson. After dinner, Hazel insisted on washing every dish despite my protests. You cooked. So? I wash. I have a dishwasher. You've had that for years. I know. You never use it. I don't trust it. She laughed for the first time with genuine warmth. I forgot how stubborn you are. I prefer dependable. That's not the word. It is in my dictionary. She shook her head. I've missed laughing. The room became quiet again. Not heavy. Just thoughtful. That sentence revealed more than any explanation could. She hadn't come because she needed a house. She had come because she needed peace. Later that evening, I carried fresh blankets into the guest room. She stood in the doorway looking confused. I thought, you can have this room. But earlier, you asked if you could stay here. I didn't mean your bedroom specifically. I figured. Color returned to her face. I was just so tired earlier. I could tell. I honestly didn't expect you to come home before evening. I finished work early. I hope I didn't frighten you. You definitely surprised me. She smiled sheepishly. I'm sorry. It's becoming your favorite phrase. I've had a difficult week. I believe you. She stepped into the guest room and looked around. The room wasn't fancy. A bookshelf. A lamp. White curtains. A wooden dresser I had restored from an abandoned farmhouse. Simple. Comfortable. I forgot this room existed. I usually keep it ready. For visitors? For possibilities. She looked puzzled. What kind of possibilities? I shrugged. Sometimes neighbors need somewhere quiet. Sometimes old friends miss the last train. Sometimes people simply need one peaceful night. She stared at me. You've really been doing this? Nothing dramatic. Oliver. People help each other. Not everyone. Enough do. She sat gently on the edge of the bed. You haven't changed as much as I thought. I hope that's a good thing. It is. After leaving her to settle in, I walked into the garden. The evening air smelled of rosemary and freshly cut grass. The small vegetable patch I had planted the previous spring was beginning to flourish. Tomatoes, beans, lettuce, carrots. Nothing impressive. Just another reminder that patient care often produced quiet miracles. My elderly neighbor, Mr. Fletcher, waved from over the fence. Evening! Evening! Saw an unfamiliar car. My guest. Family? I hesitated. In a way. He nodded as though that explained everything. Well? He smiled. Your house always seems to find the people who need it. Before I could answer, he disappeared inside. His words lingered. Maybe houses remembered kindness. Or maybe kind people simply left their doors open a little wider than most. That night sleep refused to come easily. Not because Hazel was under my roof. Because her arrival had reopened questions I thought life had already answered. Had I truly forgiven the past? Or had I simply learned to avoid thinking about it? There was a difference. Forgiveness created peace. Avoidance merely created silence. Around midnight I heard soft footsteps. I opened my bedroom door. Hazel stood in the hallway holding a glass of water. I'm sorry. There it is again. She smiled faintly. I couldn't sleep. Bad dreams? No. Worse. What? Too many thoughts. I leaned against the wall. Would you like some tea? At midnight? I never claimed to have healthy habits. She laughed quietly. I'd like that. We sat in the kitchen beneath the soft yellow light. No television. No phones. Just the sound of the kettle beginning to boil. After several minutes she spoke. Emma remarried. I know. You knew? A mutual friend mentioned it. You weren't upset? I thought carefully before answering. I hoped she'd find happiness. And you? I already had. She frowned slightly. I didn't know. I wasn't talking about another relationship. She looked confused. I meant peace. She stared into her cup. I've been chasing the wrong thing. What do you mean? I kept believing happiness was somewhere else. A different town. A different job. A different house. She smiled sadly. But sitting here. She looked around the warm kitchen. I'm starting to think happiness might simply be wherever people make room for each other. I didn't answer immediately. Some truths deserved silence before agreement. Outside, the neighborhood rested peacefully beneath a sky filled with quiet stars. Inside, two people connected only by an old family history sat across a kitchen table, slowly discovering that kindness often rebuilt bridges long after life convinced us they had disappeared forever. And neither of us could have imagined that by opening one forgotten front door that afternoon, an entirely new chapter of healing had quietly begun. Morning arrived with the gentle sound of birds gathering in the maple tree outside the kitchen window. For the first time in months, the house felt different. Not louder. Not busier. Simply alive in a quiet, ordinary way. Oliver had always believed that homes carried memories. Some echoed with arguments long after voices disappeared. Others held laughter that somehow lingered in the walls. His little cottage had spent years learning how to be peaceful again. Now it was learning something new. Company. He walked downstairs expecting to make breakfast alone, only to find Hazel standing in the kitchen wearing one of his old gardening aprons over her clothes. She was concentrating so hard on flipping pancakes that she didn't notice him at first. You still make coffee too strong, she said without turning around. Oliver smiled. You remember that? I remember coughing every Christmas morning. It built character. It nearly dissolved my taste buds. She looked over her shoulder and laughed. I found flour in the cupboard. I hope you don't mind. I'd only mind if you burned breakfast. She held up the spatula confidently. So far, so good. They ate by the window while the morning sunlight warmed the wooden table. For several minutes neither of them felt the need to fill the silence. Finally Hazel looked up. I should probably start looking for somewhere else today. Oliver spread jam onto a slice of toast before answering. Do you want to? She hesitated. I don't know. Then maybe today isn't the day to decide. I don't want to become a burden. You've been here less than 24 hours. I still don't like depending on people. I understand. He looked at her kindly. But sometimes allowing someone to help is also a gift. She frowned. How? Because it reminds them they're useful. Hazel smiled thoughtfully. You always did find unusual ways to look at things. It's less exhausting than assuming the worst. After breakfast, Oliver headed toward the small workshop behind the house. It had once been an old garage, but over the years he had transformed it into a warm space filled with workbenches, polished timber, shelves of tools, and unfinished furniture waiting for a second chance. Hazel followed a few minutes later. I forgot how much you loved fixing things. I like proving that damage doesn't always mean useless. She ran her fingers gently across a weathered wooden chair. This one's beautiful. It was left beside a rubbish skip. You rescued it? I asked permission first. She laughed. Of course you did. He turned the chair over. Loose joints. Worn finish. But the wood itself is still strong. She nodded. Like people? He smiled. Sometimes. She looked around the workshop with genuine curiosity. Every shelf held a story. A child's desk being restored for a young family. A rocking chair destined for an elderly widow. A bookshelf waiting for a community library. Nothing here would ever make Oliver wealthy. But every repaired piece eventually found someone who needed it. You give these away? Most of them. Why? Because someone once reminded me that generosity isn't measured by what you have. She tilted her head. Who told you that? My grandfather. What else did he say? Oliver picked up a small block of wood, thinking for a moment. He used to say that broken things deserve patient hands, not impatient opinions. Hazel repeated the words quietly. Patient hands. They've stayed with me. For the next hour she simply watched him work. He never hurried. Every movement seemed deliberate. Every repair began with careful observation instead of force. Eventually she asked, Can I help? He handed her a piece of fine sandpaper. Start here. I've never restored furniture. You don't need experience. What do I need? Patience. She smiled. I might be learning that. The old chair slowly began revealing fresh timber beneath years of faded varnish. It wasn't dramatic. Just small progress. But somehow that made it even more satisfying. Around midday someone knocked on the workshop door. An elderly woman stepped inside carrying a walking stick. Oliver? Morning, Mrs. Bell. She smiled warmly. I brought those raspberry muffins I promised. You didn't have to. I know. She noticed Hazel. Oh. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. Oliver introduced them. This is Hazel. My guest. Mrs. Bell immediately offered her hand. Anyone welcome here is welcome by me. Hazel smiled, visibly touched. It's lovely to meet you. Mrs. Bell looked around the workshop. I came to collect my sewing table. Oliver pointed toward a beautifully restored antique table near the wall. The elderly woman's eyes widened. Oh my goodness! She slowly approached it, gently resting one hand across its polished surface. It looks exactly as it did when Arthur gave it to me. Her voice trembled. My husband made this. Oliver nodded. I found the original wood beneath 3 layers of paint. Tears filled her eyes. I thought I'd lost this part of him forever. You hadn't. You just couldn't see it anymore. Mrs. Bell looked at Oliver for a long moment. You have a rare gift. He smiled modestly. I just repair furniture. No. She shook her head. You repair memories. Hazel watched the exchange silently. After Mrs. Bell left, she remained unusually quiet. What are you thinking? Oliver asked. She folded the sandpaper in her hands. I've spent years believing success meant earning more. Were you happy? I was busy. That's not the same thing. I know. She looked toward the empty doorway. That woman arrived carrying a table. She left carrying hope. Oliver shrugged. The table helped. You helped. He didn't answer. Compliments always made him uncomfortable. By early afternoon, Hazel offered to help in the garden. Together they pulled weeds, watered vegetables, and tied climbing beans to their supports. Neither of them noticed how easily conversation began flowing. They spoke about books, favorite walking trails, music, recipes, small things, normal things. The kind of conversations people forgot were precious until life became complicated. As they worked, Oliver noticed something changing. Hazel smiled more often. Not because her problems had disappeared. Because for a little while she wasn't carrying them alone. Late that afternoon, a small bicycle came racing toward the front gate. 8-year-old Samuel skidded to a stop. Mr. Oliver! Oliver looked up from the tomato plants. What happened? My birdhouse. What about it? It fell. Oliver laughed. I thought someone was hurt. The roof came off. That's serious business. Samuel looked at Hazel curiously. Who's she? My friend. Hazel waved. Hello? Samuel waved back enthusiastically. Can you both fix it? Oliver looked at Hazel. What do you think? She grinned. I think roofs deserve second chances. The little boy beamed. Inside the workshop they carefully repaired the tiny wooden birdhouse together. Samuel insisted on helping despite accidentally dropping 2 screws and using far too much wood glue. Hazel never once corrected him impatiently. Instead, she showed him how to hold the pieces steady while Oliver fastened them properly. When they finished, Samuel held up the birdhouse proudly. It looks better. Oliver smiled. Sometimes repaired things are stronger than before. Samuel considered that carefully. My teacher says people can be like that. Your teacher sounds wise. The little boy nodded very seriously. She gives lots of homework too. Hazel burst into laughter. So wisdom has a price? Apparently. Samuel rode away carrying the repaired birdhouse as though it were treasure. Hazel watched him disappear down the road. I don't think I've laughed that much in months. Oliver leaned against the workshop door. It suits you. She looked at him. You know something? What? When I came here yesterday. She searched for the right words. I thought I was asking for somewhere to sleep. And? I think what I really needed was somewhere to remember who I used to be. Oliver understood. Life had a quiet way of burying people beneath responsibilities until they forgot the person underneath. That evening they walked to the village market. It wasn't large. A handful of stalls. Fresh fruit. Local honey. Handmade soaps. Flowers. Nearly everyone seemed to know Oliver. People greeted him by name. A baker slipped an extra loaf into his bag. The florist handed him a small bunch of lavender. A teenager thanked him for helping repair a bookshelf at the youth center. Hazel watched every interaction with growing amazement. You never told me everyone knew you. They don't? They clearly do. I've simply lived here a long time. No. She shook her head. They smile before you even speak. He looked puzzled. I suppose they do. They trust you. Oliver thought about that. Trust wasn't built through grand gestures. It grew from years of showing up when people needed someone. As they walked home carrying groceries, Hazel suddenly stopped. Across the street stood a young mother struggling to carry several heavy bags while guiding 2 excited children. Without thinking, Oliver crossed over. May I help? The woman smiled gratefully. Only if you don't mind. Together they carried everything to her front door. It took less than 2 minutes. When Oliver returned, Hazel was still standing exactly where he'd left her. You do that automatically. What? You notice people. He looked genuinely confused. Don't most people? Not anymore. He considered her answer all the way home. That night, after dinner, Hazel found an old photo album on the living room shelf. She looked toward Oliver. May I? Of course. The first pages showed community picnics, volunteer projects, Children planting trees. Elderly neighbors celebrating birthdays. Hardly any photographs featured Oliver himself. He had been the one holding the camera. Halfway through the album, Hazel found a photograph that made her pause. It had been taken many years earlier. Before the divorce. Before families drifted apart. Emma stood smiling beside Oliver at a charity fun run. Hazel herself appeared in the background, making a silly face that neither of them had noticed at the time. She looked at the picture for a long while. "I was afraid this would upset you." Oliver sat beside her. "It doesn't. You've made peace with it. I've made peace with who I became because of it." She closed the album gently. "I spent years blaming myself." His eyebrows rose. "For what?" "I introduced you and Emma." He blinked. "Hazel. If I hadn't." He shook his head kindly. "You introduced two good people who simply weren't meant to spend forever together. I always thought I ruined everything." "You didn't." His voice was calm but certain. "Relationships succeed or fail because of the people inside them. Not because someone introduced them." A tear rolled slowly down her cheek. "I've carried that guilt for years. You don't have to carry it anymore." She covered her face briefly, breathing deeply. "I don't know why hearing that from you matters so much. Because forgiveness sounds different when it's spoken by someone who had every reason not to offer it." She looked at him through tearful eyes. "You really forgave us?" Oliver smiled gently. "I forgave life. There was nothing to gain from staying angry." Silence settled once more. Not uncomfortable. Healing often sounded exactly like this. No dramatic speeches. No impossible promises. Just honest words spoken at the right moment. Outside, the evening breeze stirred the lavender growing beneath the windows. Inside, the weight Hazel had carried for years began to lift, little by little, like dust leaving an old room after someone finally opened the curtains. And for the first time since she had quietly unlocked his forgotten front door with an old emergency key, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps she hadn't arrived at the end of her story after all. Perhaps she had simply found the place where a new beginning was patiently waiting. The following morning arrived with the kind of quiet confidence that only ordinary days possess. There were no dramatic surprises waiting outside the front door, no life-changing phone calls, and no miraculous solutions to every unanswered question. Yet somehow, everything felt different. Hazel woke before Oliver and stepped into the garden with a mug of tea warming her hands. The vegetable bed shimmered with dew. Bees wandered lazily among the lavender bushes. A pair of blackbirds argued cheerfully over a worm while the neighborhood slowly came to life. She realized something that startled her. For the first time in nearly a year, she wasn't thinking about what she had lost. She was simply enjoying where she was. Oliver joined her a few minutes later. "You found my favorite seat. I hoped you wouldn't mind. I usually only share it with birds." She smiled. "I'll try to be as well behaved." He laughed and handed her a small envelope. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a folded leaflet from the village community center. She looked puzzled. "They need volunteers," Oliver explained. "For what?" "A little bit of everything." She scanned the page. Reading afternoons for children. Furniture restoration classes. Community lunches. Garden projects. Support for older residents living alone. She looked up. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because yesterday you kept smiling whenever you were helping someone." "I noticed that too. I thought you might." She stared at the leaflet for a long moment. "I've spent years working in an office. And I was good at it. But I don't think it was where my heart lived." Oliver nodded. "Sometimes we discover that by accident. Or by walking into the wrong house." He grinned. "Technically, you walked into the right house." She laughed. "I suppose I did." That afternoon they visited the community center together. The building was modest but welcoming, filled with colorful artwork, bookshelves, donated toys, and people greeting one another by name. The director, a cheerful woman named Ruth, welcomed Oliver warmly. "You're here early this week." I brought someone. Ruth turned toward Hazel with a kind smile. Anyone who arrives with Oliver usually ends up becoming family around here. Hazel laughed. I hope that's a good thing. It's one of the best. Ruth spent the next hour showing Hazel around. In one room, retirees were teaching teenagers how to repair bicycles. In another, young parents prepared meals for elderly neighbors. The garden outside was being transformed into a sensory space by volunteers of every age. Nobody seemed interested in titles or careers. Only willingness. Hazel quietly admired that. Before leaving, Ruth asked a simple question. Would you like to come back tomorrow? Hazel looked toward Oliver. He deliberately said nothing. This wasn't his decision. She smiled. I'd love to. As they walked home, she seemed lighter than she had since arriving. I'd forgotten what it feels like to be needed. Oliver shook his head gently. You've always been needed. She frowned. Then why did I feel invisible? Because there's a difference between being useful and being seen. She stopped walking. I don't think anyone has ever explained it like that. My grandfather used to. What did he say? He believed every person deserved one place where they didn't have to earn their welcome. Hazel looked ahead at the little cottage. I think you've built that place. I've tried. You have. The days slowly became weeks. Hazel didn't spend them hiding from her future. She began building one. 3 mornings each week she volunteered at the community center. She helped organize donated books. She served tea during neighborhood lunches. She learned basic furniture restoration from Oliver, and quickly discovered she enjoyed bringing forgotten pieces back to life. Children adored her gentle patience. Older residents appreciated her willingness to listen. For the first time in years, she wasn't rushing through each day hoping tomorrow would somehow be easier. She was making today meaningful. Oliver noticed the change long before she mentioned it. The tiredness that had shadowed her face was slowly disappearing. She laughed without apologizing afterward. She hummed while watering the tomatoes. She began making plans instead of excuses. One evening, nearly 6 weeks after her unexpected arrival, she placed an envelope on the kitchen table. I found a flat. Oliver looked at it quietly. Congratulations. She smiled. It's only 10 minutes away. That's close. I wanted to stay nearby. I'm glad. She hesitated. I was worried you'd think I was overstaying my welcome. I would have told you. I know. That's why I wasn't worried. She laughed. I'll move in next Saturday. The words were happy. Yet both of them felt the quiet sadness that often accompanies good changes. Not because something precious was ending. Because something precious had become real. On moving day, the entire neighborhood somehow seemed to know. Mr. Fletcher arrived with his trailer. Mrs. Bell baked 2 apple pies. Samuel insisted on carrying a box that was clearly too heavy for him until Oliver secretly removed half its contents. Even Ruth appeared with a bouquet of wildflowers. Hazel stood in the middle of Oliver's living room looking completely overwhelmed. I didn't ask anyone to come. Oliver smiled. You didn't have to. They all came because... He shrugged. Kindness spreads. The move took less than 2 hours. The little flat wasn't large. A sunny sitting room. A compact kitchen. A bedroom overlooking a park where children played every afternoon. It wasn't luxurious. But it felt hopeful. As everyone finished unpacking, Hazel noticed something resting on the windowsill. A beautifully restored wooden birdhouse. She immediately recognized it. The one Samuel repaired. Oliver nodded. He wanted you to have it. She picked it up carefully. He said every new home deserves visitors. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't deserve people like this. Mrs. Bell overheard her. My dear. She smiled warmly. That's exactly why you do. Everyone laughed softly. The weeks turned into months. Autumn painted the village in shades of amber and crimson. The community garden flourished beyond expectations. Oliver continued restoring furniture. Hazel began leading beginner workshops every Wednesday afternoon. She discovered that teaching wasn't about knowing every answer. It was about encouraging people not to give up halfway through. One afternoon, a teenage boy named Louis became frustrated while repairing an old stool. "I've ruined it." Hazel smiled. "No. It looks terrible. It looks unfinished. There's a difference." He looked unconvinced. She placed another restored chair beside him. "Do you know what this looked like when Oliver found it?" He shook his head. "Worse than yours." "What changed?" "Someone believed it was worth saving." Louis stared quietly at the stool before picking up the sandpaper again. Oliver watched from across the workshop. He smiled to himself. Without realizing it, Hazel had started speaking the same language of hope that had welcomed her months earlier. Winter arrived gently. The first community Christmas gathering filled the hall with music, homemade food, and neighbors exchanging simple gifts. Ruth stood near the stage holding a microphone. "Before we finish tonight," she announced, "there's one person we'd like to thank." Oliver immediately looked toward the floor. He disliked public attention. Ruth laughed. "Yes, Oliver, I'm talking about you." The room filled with warm applause. He looked embarrassed. "I haven't done anything special." Mrs. Bell stood. "That's exactly the problem." Everyone laughed. Samuel raised his hand enthusiastically. "He fixes everything." Another volunteer added. "Even when we don't ask." Someone else smiled. "And he remembers everyone's birthdays." Oliver covered his face. "Please stop." Hazel watched quietly from the back of the room. Ruth continued. "This village has become kinder because one man quietly decided that every person deserved patience." She then turned unexpectedly toward Hazel. "And we're equally grateful for someone who reminded us that accepting kindness is every bit as courageous as offering it." The applause grew even louder. Hazel looked genuinely surprised. She hadn't realized anyone had noticed her journey. After the gathering, they walked home beneath a sky scattered with bright stars. Either of them spoke for several minutes. Finally, Hazel broke the silence. "Can I tell you something?" "Always." "The day I unlocked your front door." She smiled sheepishly. "I thought I was the one asking for help." "You were. But now I think you helped me do something much bigger." "What was that?" "You helped me believe I still had something valuable to give." Oliver looked at the quiet street ahead. "I never doubted it." "I did." "I know." She smiled. "Thank you for never treating me like someone who needed rescuing." "You didn't." "What then?" "You simply needed somewhere safe to stand until you remembered your own strength." She stopped walking. "I'll never forget that." Months later, spring returned to the village. Flowers filled the gardens again. Birds nested inside the little wooden birdhouse outside Hazel's flat. The community center expanded its volunteer programs. Oliver's workshop welcomed more apprentices than ever before. Life wasn't perfect. Some days remained difficult. Unexpected problems still appeared. Plans still changed. People still carried worries they couldn't solve overnight. But now they carried them together. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Oliver unlocked the front door of his cottage after returning from the market. Something caught his eye immediately. A small envelope rested on the hallway table. Inside was a brand new emergency key attached to a handwritten note. It read, "I think every welcoming house should keep one spare key ready for the next person who needs hope. Thank you for opening your door when I had forgotten how to open my heart. Hazel." Oliver smiled quietly. He walked outside and looked across the village. Children laughed in the distance. Neighbors waved as they passed. Somewhere nearby, someone was building, someone was repairing, someone was comforting, and someone was beginning again. He slipped the new key into the little ceramic bowl by the front door. Not because he expected another unexpected visitor, but because life had taught him something beautiful. A house becomes a home not because of its walls, furniture, or photographs. It becomes a home because someone inside chooses compassion over suspicion, patience over judgment, and kindness over convenience. Sometimes the greatest gift we can offer another person isn't a perfect solution, or a life-changing speech. Sometimes it's simply a safe place to rest long enough to remember who they really are. And every act of quiet kindness, no matter how small it seems, has the remarkable power to unlock doors that fear, loneliness, and regret could never open. That is how ordinary people create extraordinary hope, one welcoming heart, one open door, and one simple act of compassion at a time.